Good afternoon and welcome to the Division 47 webinar, Applied Intervention in Sport, Exercise, and Performance Psychology. All participants are muted throughout the webinar. Please submit any questions using the Questions tab. Questions will be answered within the last 15 minutes of the presentation. And now we will have an introduction of our speakers by Bree Jones.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today's title of the webinar is called Applied Intervention in Sport and Exercise and Performance Psychology. This presentation is hosted by APA Division 47, the Society for Sport, Exercise, and Performance Psychology. My name is Bree Jones, and I'm one of two student representatives for Division 47, along with Chelsea Battle. And on behalf of the division, we'd like to welcome you to today's event. We're excited and grateful to be hosting this wonderful panel today. We have three presenters, and we'll leave approximately 15 minutes at the end for questions. So ask the questions in the panel, and feel free to send them along as the presentation is going along. For anyone unable to join us today, the webinar will be recorded and posted on the Division 47 social media pages. If anyone's interested in joining our division after this wonderful webinar, you can reach out to us and let us know that you want to join. We will be live tweeting during this webinar with the hashtag interventions in SEPP is what the hashtag will be, so you can follow along with that. So we're so fortunate to have these three panelists today. They agreed a long time ago to do this webinar, and we're so grateful for them because they're going to have a lot of knowledge for us today. So the presenters are Dr. Elena Espinal, Dr. Jessie Michelle, and Dr. Veronique Richard.
Hello.
Dr. Jessie is a certified mental performance consultant, is listed on the United States Olympic Committee registry. I'm so sorry. He is currently on the mental skills coordinator for the Houston Astros right now, and I heard they just had a job opening. So over the past few years, Dr. Jessie has worked with thousands of athletes, coaches, soldiers, and performers across the country. Next, we have Dr. Veronique. She's currently a mental performance consultant for Cirque du Soleil and enjoys a rich and varied performance psychology practice, primarily working as a mental performance consultant with different Canadian national teams, so like water polo, synchronized swimming, and individual elite athletes, as far as like gymnastic athletes, figure skating, and trampoline. So exciting. And then last but not least is Dr. Elena, who is a #1 best-selling author, high-performance psychologist, and intuitive leadership business mentor who has been up-leveling speakers, performers, athletes, coaches, entrepreneurs, CEOs, all of these people to become their best selves and legendary leaders over the past 18 years. She unlocks and unleashes untapped potential through self-empowerment, mental and emotional flexibility, and intuition to make the best possible. So, we're so happy to have you all join us today. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Jessie.
All right. Thank you, Bree. Really appreciate that. Hopefully y'all can see the title slide here. Thank you so much for having us. Myself and Veronique and Elena are thrilled to be here, and we're happy to have the opportunity to speak to everyone in the audience. And after listening to the introduction there, I know I sound way more important than I really am, but I know I want to get some work done with Elena and Veronique to make my own performance better. So we're really excited to get a chance to share some of our best practices with y'all and some of the experiences and opportunities that we've had the privilege to go through with the athletes that we work with. And whether it's myself or Veronique and Elena, we each spend the majority of our time in different contexts, and hopefully whether you're a grad student, whether you're a professional, hopefully there's some takeaway from all of our experiences, and we'll definitely leave time at the end for questions. So just a little bit about myself before I get going. Like Bree said, I'm the mental skills coordinator for the Houston Astros. It's a great time to be an Astro. We just clinched our 3rd straight AOS division title, which is awesome. Like Bree said, we do have an opening, so if you're in the market for new opportunities, please feel free to contact me offline. But tremendous 3 years here with the Astros, and very fortunate to be with them. And before that, I did some work with the U.S. Army as well as a master resilience trainer and performance expert. So today's learning objectives, what you guys can expect. This is something that was sent along in the email. We're going to talk each based on our context and the environments we work in, some of the theory that we pull from, evidence-based research to support our practices. And we're going to talk to you guys about how we design creative activities that challenge our athletes and performers based on the different contexts that we work in. And then also talk a little bit about evaluating the effectiveness of the work that we do. And I know I can just speak from experience. It seems to me that that's a constant theme of conversation with the colleagues that I interact with is, hey, how are you evaluating what you're doing? What are some best practices to do so? And what does that look like, whether you're working for a team or you're on your own? So before we get started, just a little nod to, at least for me, what it's like to work in elite sport with the athletes that I work with on a daily basis. And where we're at, the margin for error is so small, and our guys work so hard. When you're talking about baseball players, I mean, thinking about an organization, players typically, will show up and have 8-10-hour days, whether they're working before the game for 6-7 hours in the cage in their weight room. There's just a lot of work that goes on that's outside of the game. And then for baseball players, it's, they might get 4 at-bats a game, so it's a few minutes a game of actual performance, and a lot of work that goes into that. So I really like this quote from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, and a little nod to the San Antonio Spurs and their great recent history in terms of performance. When nothing seems to help, I go and look at a stonecutter hammering away at his rock perhaps 100 times without as much as crack showing in it. Yet at the 101st blow, it'll split in two, and I know that it was not the last blow that did it, but all that had gone before. And I put that quote on here because I think it represents, at least in my environment and the context that we work in, that's sort of the theme. You work and you might not see the results, and it's classic process over outcome. So speaking of our environment, I think it's important to kind of have a 30,000 foot view of what it's like to work in baseball as I get into some of the experiences. So obviously you have your manager, your owner, general manager, and assistant general managers, 2 different departments, baseball ops and business ops. We're primarily in baseball ops, and within that there's directors of player development, directors of sports medicine and performance. And as far as player development, who we work with on a daily basis, whether it's myself, the pitching coordinator, the hitting coordinator, the coaches, developmental coaches, and then really trying to understand the immediate context we have, whether it's strength conditioning, athletic trainers, mental skills coaches, and sports scientists, nutritionists. As part of the sports medicine and performance staff of the Astros, that's who I work with on a daily basis, those sports medicine and performance staff and those coaches, in addition to the athletes. So we're very fortunate in that sense that we get an opportunity in-house every day to work with all the influencers that can have an impact on the athlete. And I can appreciate and understand that not everyone's in that situation, but I think it does help you provide an understanding for where I'm coming from with this presentation. And then our players, I mean, so varied in terms of where they're from, whether it's America, whether it's the Dominican Republic, whether it's Venezuela, other international countries, high school, college, and then position players and pitchers. So it's a very complex system, a very complex dynamic with, I think we have currently 250 plus players, another 50 coaches, another 50 sports medicine staff. So it's a machine that has a lot of parts, and I think it's important to understand that as we continue. So as far as baseball players, what does it take to succeed at this high level? It takes strength, it takes mobility, it takes vision, focus, decision-making, mechanics, physical skill, and emotional control. And not every one of those skills is about mental skills. So like I said, we get the opportunity to really integrate with our strength and conditioning coaches, with our athletic trainers, with our skill coaches, with our sports scientists in order to provide the best development plan that we can for the athlete. And as far as theoretical foundations for us, we pull on a lot of different areas, a lot of different disciplines. In top left, your classic sport and performance psychology, exercise psychology, pull on that a lot, behavior change theory, systems theory, sports sciences down here, dynamic movement, skill acquisition. So these are some areas that maybe as far as coming out of graduate school or as a sports psychology professional might not have had the type of education and training necessary to really be able to communicate as well as we're able to now with the sports sciences. But I say this and I bring this up because whether you're somebody who works in an environment that has all these resources or not, as a sports psychology professional, if you're working with athletes and they're coming into your office, challenging yourself to really take these other influencers into account when doing the work. So for us, meeting our players where they're at, excuse me, I think best practice number one, and this shouldn't be new to anyone, but some learning opportunities for me over the last few years, whether it's age, kind of where they're from, really take into cultural considerations, considering that the international player versus the American player, not just that, but all obviously the cultural differences depending on what country our players are from and how they grew up, what influences they had, whether it be coaches or education, parental involvement, just really trying to understand on an individual basis where that athlete's coming from, trying to understand current trends across our athletes population. I have on here some of the things that I've noticed, and you might say vaping, these are elite athletes. Well, they need to, some of them need to manage their stress however they can, and unfortunately turn to that at times. But also video games, social media, what takes up most of their day when they're not playing, and then understanding the context of the athlete in their environment. So what period of the season are they in? What's the hierarchy like? Depending on their what sport they're playing or what level they're at, and really embracing their world. So leveraging their interests, and as somebody who it might not be my natural instinct to engage on social media or to post a lot on social media, meeting our athletes where they're at, and recognizing that they're on it. So we have to provide content. We have to be able to communicate with them through that medium, and then leveraging what we know about this generation and what's important to them. Video feedback, multimedia content, and then finally finding valid and reliable measures that can track their progress on some of these areas of mental skills that we teach, whether it's confidence, whether it's emotional control, whether it's stress management, focus and attention. And they're so used to getting that immediate feedback, finding those ways that we can provide that. So the title of my part of the presentation was From Theory to Practice, kind of the what, why, and how. And so part of what myself and the other presenters are going to do is take you through a little bit of the theory that we pull on when it comes to working with the athletes in our environment, and then hopefully provide some creative drills or techniques or strategies to reinforce those. And so for me, one of the theories that I pull on very frequently is SDT, and when we're talking about autonomy and competency and relatedness, and I'm sure this is review for many of you, but autonomy, the athlete's ability to feel like they have control kind of over their own process, competency, their belief in their ability to complete the task and where they stand in the environment, and then relatedness, the ability to connect and communicate with people from all over. And in our environment, where right now I'm in West Palm Beach and we're in the middle of a camp, and there's 150 people here from 10 different countries, ranging from the age of 17 to late 60s. This is really important. So I'm going to go through, instead of going through the theory, I'm going to take you through some of the ways that we apply and integrate SDT. So as far as autonomy, we make it a point to be very deliberate with providing players with feedback loops that are driven by them, engaging with them, consistently asking them where they're at in their development. They know what their goals are. We have a system in place in our organization to provide feedback, to provide updates consistently on their goals, but then engaging and asking them where they think they're at, so they're in control of their development to an extent. And we provide that feedback and create the environment for skill development. Player development systems, limiting controlled motivation. So again, this is the difference between intrinsic versus controlled motivation. We have systems in place, whether it's you're talking about growth first fixed mindset, talking about the relationship between mind and body, pulling on other theories like CBT, and then using motivational interviewing as well to get the athlete to identify maybe what are some of the things that are stopping them from getting to where they want to go, having them come up with the obstacles, and identifying some solution strategies, and then empowering them and providing them with the resources to be able to do that. And finally, having them tap into their why. So we spend a lot of time talking to our athletes about why are they here, not just for family, not just to potentially put their themselves in a financial situation for generations that they don't have to worry about much, but also in the moment. I'm here because I love the feeling of the ball off my bat. So really giving them that autonomy to control what they can control. When it comes to competency, providing them with objective statistics versus subjective measures, and feeding them ways to evaluate themselves that are objective and they're important. And in baseball, an example that might be on base plus slugging percentage versus batting average, where batting average is a lot of times based on luck and things out of your control, whereas on base percentage is something that might be more in your control. So we talk a lot process versus outcome, having the athlete track their progress through journals, through other ways of tracking their development. Talk about mindset training and having them develop the right perspective when they might start to think ineffectively, giving them the skill set to train their mind to be aware of that and get back to having the right mindset. And then cultural awareness, so knowing where they fit in the environment. And then relatedness, really providing opportunities for them to communicate with one another, setting up whether it's cooking classes where some of our players might bring dishes that are that are native to their country and they can share with some other folks, or providing certain apparel or certain incentives where they can feel like they're on a team together. Because with a group of 250 players, sometimes it's easy to get lost. So we want to make sure that they feel that relatedness. And one more example of from theory to practice. Again, this is probably review for many of you, but Niederfer's model of attentional and interpersonal styles, and talking about internal and external focus and broad and narrow focus. And whereas we might not go with the players through, hey, what is self-determination theory? In this case, we do. We talk about when are you in a broad external area of focus, or we want them to know what it feels like to be in narrow internal versus narrow external focus. And one way we do that is we'll talk to them about kind of this concept of the different areas of focus, and then we'll take them through an at-bat and talk to them about, hey, when you're in the on-deck circle, it might be helpful to be broad internal, where you're analyzing the scouting report, or you're developing your approach for that at-bat. And as you step into the batter's box, perhaps you want to tap into a feel cue. You want to feel your hip really get into the ball, or you want to get into a do cue, see the ball, hit the ball. Having that a broad external, picking up the environment, and then talk to them about specifically when they get to narrow internal. And then we'll actually go out with them and we'll have them feel like what this feels like during an at bat, or we'll take them on the field and have them go from the on deck circle to the batter's box and talk us through what might get in the way of them being in the right place at the right time. And then we'll watch them in the cage and reinforce some of those patterns and behaviors. So again, two different examples of theory to practice. One we really talk about with the athlete. The other one we just set up the environment to reinforce the theory. And I know I have just a few minutes left here, so I'm going to talk about our process for in terms of developing a mental skills program and kind of transitioning from the what the why and the how to the evaluation piece. So for everything we teach, this is just a sample. One of our mental skills might be mind-body connection. So the relationship between what we're thinking and if we're putting our body in a position to perform or not. And for each of our mental skills, we have, hey, what's the content and topics that we want to cover? What's some sample technology and videos that we might use to highlight or reinforce or create a foundation for some dialogue about that topic or that skill? What are our strategies and techniques that we're going to use to reinforce and train that skill? And then what are some activities that we're going to do, again, to reinforce and create an opportunity for us to have some dialogue between myself and the player and the coach? And then finally, ways to measure progress, which I'll get to here in a bit. And for us, some of the ways that we measure effectiveness, player observation and behavior change. I mean, part of what we do if we're talking about mental skills, we want to develop the right mindset and approach to change behavior. So one way to determine if we're having an impact is if players are changing their behavior, if they're practicing their routines, if they're demonstrating better emotional control, if they're able to get to the next pitch or next at bat, if they argue with the umpire less, maybe in those moments that they feel like they're squeezed or they feel like the umpire made a bad call, they're able to get to the next pitch. Do a lot of training with coaches and observe their behavior change as well, and provide individualized programs to our players and coaches and see if they adhere to those. And we track that, and we engage both with our coaches and players and front office personnel to see if they're doing what they committed to. Receiving subjective feedback at the end of each year, we have a pretty comprehensive mental training program report, as you can see down here, that we provide to our front office just in terms of feedback from the coaches, feedback from the players. And we're consistently getting subjective feedback as well. And then some of the internal assessments that we use to track some of the whether it's heart rate variability, whether it's cognitive decision making, trying to track some of those measurables throughout the year. And then providing that to the front office without giving away, obviously, any confidentiality, but providing something that demonstrates that we are making progress. So finally, finishing up here, just for me, in our context, in our environment, some key takeaways. I think working with coaches and sports medicine and performance professionals is key. So if you have the opportunity to do that, if you're in an environment where you can collaborate with strength coaches and integrate some of this work in the training room or in the weight room, that's tremendous. And if you're not, if athletes are coming to you one-on-one, I highly encourage going to their place of training, or if you can't do that, going to train with them and really trying to apply some of the work that you're doing in their environment. Challenging the athletes to keep track of their progress. Again, you're going back to motivational interviewing or setting up an environment that creates some autonomy and some competence. And then visiting with the athlete in their place of work or at the cage or on the field, where it's not just in the office, and really trying to understand where they're coming from. And just learning and appreciating the context the athlete's working in, and putting the athlete's needs ahead of yourself. And just finally, kind of finishing up for me, some other ethical considerations that are important in our environment is identifying who that client is, whether it's the athlete or even the coach in some cases, and maintaining appropriate modes of communication, ethical flow of information. I mentioned it's our job, and in my job, I have to provide the front office with some information that we're doing work, we're coming from an evidence-based perspective, and need to provide some information on the work we're doing, yet also maintain the confidentiality of our players. And then finally, staying in your lane. So if you're in my case, with that, not being a licensed psychologist, knowing when I need to refer out or when whatever the athlete's working on can be taken care of in-house, and then working with our licensed providers in the area or in our minor league affiliates to help. So I think that was about 15 minutes, just some selected references, and I'm going to turn it back over to Bree, I believe. Or I'll turn it over to Veronique. Let me get out of here.
Hey. Great. Can everyone see my screen? I hope so. Whoa. What's going on? I guess you can see my screen, but I can't, so that's not really useful. Bree, can you help me here? Because I don't see my screen. I see myself in big, which is not really useful.
And Veronique, if necessary, you can close out your webcam if that would help, because I am seeing your screen and I see you. So if it's best now, yes, all we see is your screen. Can you see your screen?
Okay, and you don't.
Okay.
Yeah, now I can see my screen.
Okay, you can go ahead. You good.
Okay. So hi, everybody. First, thank you to the APA for inviting me to speak to you today. So I think Bree did an amazing job at introducing me and where I work. I would just add that I'm also an associate researcher at the National Circus School. And although you might be interested in the specific work that I do with circus, I thought that what was the most useful for everyone today was maybe to talk to you about how I'm developing mental skills in athletes, inspired from everything that I'm fortunate enough to see in those two circus organizations that I'm working for. Please, if you have some specific question about how to work with circus artists, feel free to reach out, and it will be my pleasure to have a discussion with you. So, what I want to introduce to you today is non-specific and specific intervention to increase probability of adaptation. Doesn't seem that I have the control. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, so the first thing, just to give a little background, one of the things that I'm going to talk, or what I want to develop with those two non-specific and specific intervention, the first thing, I'm challenging three major skills. So first thing that I like to challenge in my athlete is their tolerance to discomfort, their awareness of stimuli and state in the moment without judgment, and the regulation of their attention. The goal of challenging those skills for me is to induce a positive perception of various situation or environments, and also the perception that they have the psychological abilities to do so. And my optimal outcome would be to increase the probability of their capacity to adapt. So, I really like the dynamical system theory as an evidence foundation to inspire my intervention. Although this model comes a little bit more from skill acquisition, I really like to believe that it can be right for motor movement, but it can be right also for psychological skills. So basically, the concept of dynamical system theory is to create a chaos in the environment, chaos in the person. And yes, for a moment, this person will feel a little unstable because this person will lie in between two different metastable states. Yet, the goal is to provide an environment that will be supportive enough so the person can walk through the discomfort and develop new skills. I think Jesse mentioned it, to create the best chaos possible. Of course, knowing your athlete is something that is important. The knowledge of the task is also something that, like the task meaning the sport that your athlete is practicing, and also working with coaches and tolerating discomfort yourself would be something important. I will talk a little bit more about this last point later on. So basically, this goes back to the nonlinear pedagogy and I like to call this setting a risk-friendly environment. I like psychological safety, of course. I just feel that sometimes we need to take some risk, which are well supported, which means it's still a really safe environment. For instance, by manipulating some task constraint. I'm a French speaker, as you've already noticed, I'm pretty sure. Encourage variability, remove barriers and allow mistake, and increase freedom and promote problem solving. I like to use improvisation, and this is what we are going to discuss for the next few minutes. Oh, I'm sure you recognize in the objective that I gave you different theory. For instance, mindfulness theory, emotional regulation theory. Yet the one that I really like to base my intervention on is this concept of the two perception probabilistic concept of adaptation, which is basically if you can perceive the task or the challenge as accessible, and you can also perceive that you have the skill to just handle the challenge, then your probability of adaptation increase. So let me tell you a little story about where this idea of bringing improvisation into sport come from. A few years ago, yeah, a lot of years ago. So in 2011, I was lucky enough to do an internship at Cirque du Soleil. And although it was a mental performance internship, I became fascinated by all the artistic sessions that are happening at circus. So at Cirque du Soleil, which is a specific thing at Cirque du Soleil, they are bringing athletes in. So gymnasts, trampoline, divers, all those athletes are coming in with sometimes a really small artistic background, meaning that they have to kind of catch up. So there is some session offered to the athlete for them to become artists. And yes, I was really attracted by those sessions, yet not necessarily for the artistic goal behind those sessions, but mostly for the psychological goal behind those sessions. What I mean by this is I was seeing artists evolving so much psychologically in those sessions. I was like, oh, I'm so curious to measure if indeed there's something happening. I was finishing my master's degree at that time, so that was a perfect topic to start a PhD, which I did with that project. So I asked two of the Cirque du Soleil professors if they would be willing to take a group of 10 figure skater and make them go through that theatrical and comic improvisation session. Fortunately, they said yes. So we created a 20 hours of intervention based on improvisation, where I measure a self-esteem, like you can see on your screen right now, acceptation, self-regulation of attention, and creative attitude and value. You can see that all those variables increase either slightly or significantly. And on the right side of your screen, you can see that we also interviewed the skaters to see what they were thinking of this or the perceived benefit. I also want to bring your attention on some quotes, and especially those that are linked with the goal of what I mentioned earlier. So if you look at this A4 here, one of the goal of those classes is to not care about what we look like, just do it. Another one brought the fact that it helped him become more aware of how to keep your focus in the present moment. And another one brought the fact that they were less afraid to try different things. So based on that, I start thinking that maybe we can introduce on a more daily basis some improvisation in sport. So I developed a movement improvisation intervention, which I'm going to present really rapidly. So when I tell athletes that we are going to improvise, most of the time they look like this. They give me the look, the uncertain look. Then I always set two rules in the end for like to set the environment. The first rule is that you have to leave your judgment at the door. The judgment of others, of course, but most of all, the judgment of your own self. The next rule, the second rule, there is no other rule. Basically, I am here to stimulate some stuff or just to bring some stimuli to the table. The way you will answer those stimuli, it's really, really up to you. Therefore, my role is only to suggest stimuli and to challenge movement. The rest, it's really up to them to do whatever they feel like doing in this instant. Of course, so I'm going to give you a couple examples. A really simple exercise that we do is that we walk. Everybody walk. I don't think that we reconsider necessarily how we walk. So I make athlete walk with different substance. So what if your body was all made of oil? Or what if your body was made of water? Or the one that they always find funny, it's peanut butter. And they're like, what? Crunchy or smooth? And I'm like, I don't care. So this is an example. We also do the chain of movement. So they got to inspire their movement from the person in front of them, which create a chain of movement. We also move with the scale of frustration, starting from 1 out of 10, which is a low frustration. And then we increase slowly into a 9 out of 10. That can be interesting as well. So as you see, I just use different stimulus. And the most important part of those interventions, so during the movement session, they feel a little awkward, yet the debrief and at the end, which is mainly to generate awareness and transferability, are really important because this is how they connect the dots and realize that, yes, I can transfer those skills, no matter what the skills they get out of the exercise, to my sport. So that was for the non-specific intervention. And now the specific intervention. I did some work with trampoline, and I call this getting yourself in and out of trouble. So basically, the idea came from, so this is the coach. I'm not sure she would like to see herself like that, but whatever. So one day she told me, you know, in trampoline, it's not a matter of if they will do mistake. In trampoline, if you just do a little mistake, it can change a lot your performance. So she told me it's a matter of how they will adapt to the mistake they do. In trampoline, you have 10 movements in a row to execute, and if you stop, you cannot start again. It's over. So if you stop after 3 movements because you are a little bit too much on the side of the trampoline, then your score will only be based on 3 movements, which is usually you're done with this competition. So based on this, what I did is I introduced to athletes the concept of focus plan by educating them about the different attentional strategy that they can use while they are doing their routine. So the first thing we do is always that we establish a focus plan according to different sequence of movement, easy to moderate. I don't go into the really difficult movement just because you will see what we do after. It's a safety, it's just a matter of safety. So first, the coach asks the athlete to perform different sequence. With them, I will set different focus to those sequence. Then the coach will randomly ask to the athlete to get into trouble. So for instance, in the first sequence, I want you to push yourself forward, meaning that you will be really on the side of the trampoline. And she does that according to their tendency. So sometimes when they do a backward movement, they have the tendency to go to a certain place on the trampoline. So she will ask them on purpose to do it this time. The athlete must prepare and then execute the sequence as the coach asks. Their task during the execution is really to stay aware and notice without judgment where they are on the trampoline and then regulate their focus according to how they feel and what they have to do next. at the end, when the task is done, we just help them to realize which attentional strategy helped them to get out of trouble and not stop the routine. And once the right strategy has been established, the goal is simply to create kind of a focus plan B. So the plan A is, if everything goes right, this is what you are focusing on. But what if not everything goes right? So for instance, if I am in the corner after X movement, I focus on Y to go back to the middle, because in trampoline, going back to the middle, it's kind of the goal. So this is a little bit inspired from the same principle, and I'm gonna leave or I'm gonna close this talk with this quote. You know, when you do those things as a practitioner, a coach, or a leader, you must be ready to take risk yourself. You must tolerate that your athlete will get worse before they get better. For instance, when we do this with the trampoline at the beginning, it's a little mess, yet they get used to it. And a dynamical theory approach is not only about making others uncomfortable, it's about working through the mess with them. When I do my movement improvisation at the beginning, I always wonder why I do this, why I'm putting myself in such uncomfortable situation. But each time we finish an intervention, I know, because I can feel athlete got something out of it. On that note, thanks to everybody for being attentive and listening to me.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm so delighted to be here with you and really honored to be here with you. And I'm going to get this started. And both Jessie and Veronique have done such a beautiful job that, you know, I am just really honored to be here sharing with you. I'm going to try to minimize this so that it's out of my way. So I'm going to ask for forgiveness from the start, because I'm going to try to speak rather quickly so that I can get through things, but feel free to ask, you know, as we go along. I have titled my presentation High Performance Leadership, Applied Interventions Beyond Support and Performance. I feel like Jessie did such a beautiful job talking about athletes, and I knew that Veronique was going to be talking about some of her work with performers and circus artists. And so I really wanted to share a little bit more of something, how I'm using my work. So the context of my work is that I am in private practice. I've been in private practice for about 12 years. I actually started working with performers, with dancers and aerial artists. I am an aerial dancer myself. And so this is sort of kind of where things started. Then I began working with athletes, and then business owners, CEOs, and public speakers. And then I began to ask, like, what does this whole group have in common? And then I recognized that they're all leaders at all levels. And so part of what I really love about my work is that it gives me a ton of freedom, lots of flexibility, and keeps me on my toes. So it just gives me the right amount of challenge for me. I work with teams and individuals. I do speaking, education, training, and coaching. I provide applied experiences for them, personal attention, and accountability. So within that, the general breadth of my work is that I do an in-depth assessment, needs identification. Often we'll conduct off-site visits when they're needed, goal setting, creating customized interventions for the people that I'm working with, and tracking progress, and then evaluation. And then of course I have time to then still do some of my aerial work. So why leadership? Why focus on leadership? For me, it's that whether it's college athletes or executive teams, they really have the opportunity to develop self-mastery and self-leadership. And then by such, then lead by example, because they are either the current or the future leaders of the world. And so for me, it's really not just about, it's not really just about high performance, but really about building exceptional human beings. I feel like I am in the business of building exceptional human beings, really people of high integrity, high emotional resilience, people who are courageous enough to go after the highest and scariest goals, and then who also have that internal fortitude to pick themselves up when they landed on their faces with grace and aplomb. Because as we know, the school of life is going to provide lots of those opportunities. And then also to learn to view every performance situation as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to show leadership in the best way possible. Because ultimately, it's not just about what we do individually, but also how we extend what we do into those around us. The other major piece of my work is really building emotional resilience, emotional intelligence and resilience. Partly because effective emotional identification, expression, and regulation has been associated with greater levels of interpersonal effectiveness, the ability to bounce back and achieve emotional balance after hardship and disappointment. It's also our ability to generate positive emotions such as joy, happiness, excitement that really have been shown to elevate our own levels of energy, optimism, resourcefulness, critical thinking, flexibility, focus, and overall enhanced performance. It also has been associated with greater levels of enhanced healing. So in the end, it's really when we asked many of successful CEOs and athletes, what was the one thing that they could attribute to high performance? You know, they all had similar answers, and they all said feeling. So they said, I get into this feeling, or I feel powerful and strong, or I feel invincible, or it's the feeling that I have inside that lets me know. And so obviously, as energy beings, we really need to learn how we generate those enhanced feeling states so that we can generate our own energy, motivation, and perseverance. In the end, for me, it's really about helping them see that they are the power plant, they are the generator, and they have the power to create that regardless of what's happening outside in their environment. You know, how often do we hear, well, like this was going well, so then I felt this way, or, you know, this happened, so then I felt, you know, and so to be able to say like, no, you have ownership and empowerment for you to create and generate whatever feeling state that you want to be in. So in the end, like foundational skills for leaders include many of these, and probably things that I may not have included here: focus, attentional shifting, managing multiple demands, critical thinking, prioritizing, decision-making, balancing strategy and technique, creative thinking, and innovation. On the emotional side, we really want people that are able to connect emotionally, like we don't want robots, right? People that have the appropriate amount of emotional expression, but that can also regulate their emotion. And as Veronique was saying, have a high level of tolerance for distress. If we cannot learn to tolerate distress and we cannot regulate our emotions effectively, then all hell breaks loose, basically, right? People that have courage, risk-taking, motivation of self and others, inspiration, people that are able to remain calm under pressure, and who have the emotional and mental flexibility to go back and forth. So some of this theory, from theory to practice, I'm going to tell you a little bit. Like I believe that we are energy bodies, energy systems, and so that we really need to look at people from the integration of spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical energetic systems. And that is the integration of those rather than just one or two singly. In regards to my interventions, I am at the core, I am obviously a humanistic psychologist. I probably would think of myself as an existential psychologist, but you know, most of us tend to get to be pretty integrative and eclectic. I do use lots of interventions from EFT, both emotionally focused therapy and emotional freedom techniques, and then positive psychology, DBT, ACT, CBT, and NLP. So these are kind of things that are informing some of the techniques that I might use. This is one of the theories that it's behind the two techniques that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So, which is the broaden and build theory of positive emotions, which suggests that multiple distinct positive emotions are essential to optimal functioning. So what it does, it broadens people's thought action repertoires. What does that mean? Well, we have particular thought patterns, feeling patterns, behavior patterns, and then we create chains. This thought loops to this feeling and then loops to this behavior, so that eventually, whenever something looks like, then we act this way. And so the idea is that we want to broaden the repertoire of these particular patterns and responses to certain situations. It also will undo the lingering negative impact of negative emotions. It will fuel psychological resilience. I think of this as like kind of increasing the tank of resilience, and then building resilience and triggering upward spirals towards emotional well-being. So I think of this a little bit as creating the upward positive momentum that we are always looking for and seeking. So one of the things that Fredrickson really looked and saw was that people that are experiencing positive affect states are able to demonstrate thought patterns that are more flexible, more creative, more integrative, that are more efficient, and that have an openness to experience and variety, which is ultimately what we want when we are looking for creativity and we're looking for innovation. So the particular intervention that I want to talk to you about today, it's based on it's called the Ring of Power, and it's based on the idea of behavioral psychology, that we are able to create a particular anchor. And what anchors are, if I'm going to just give you a little quick review, basically is that we can feel any particular emotional state anytime that we want to. And that if we can experience the peak of that intensity associated state through feeling through our own eyes, basically we are feeling and we're experiencing, and we provide a unique either internal or external stimuli, that then this will create a neurological association that then it can be instantly triggered when needed. So this particular intervention is what we call a stacked anchor, that includes basically stacking several anchors. And it's also considered to be a resource anchor, so meaning something that is going to fill that particular tank. And so it could be used, I mostly use it with speakers. I use it a lot with athletes, so they could use like right before they go on stage, right before they go on, their competition, right before they go on to their performance. So the purpose is that we are going to anchor the experience of positive affective states that are going to fuel high performance states. So you're going to be asking your particular athlete or client, what are the specific states that this leader has identified as contributing to flow and excellence? Now, I have kind of put some here on the side, excitement, joy. These are just examples. I just kind of wanted you to get a sense of what are some things. These are just examples. You can anchor as few as one, or you can anchor as many as, 6 or 7, really. So I usually try to keep it to between 1 and 6, because when there are way too many, then it becomes a little bit more challenging. So you're going to want to anchor each of these states individually. So you're going to ask them, can you remember a specific time when you felt excitement? And you really want to ask for a very specific time, because we want to elicit the emotion at the peak of that particular emotion, rather than just kind of our generalized sense of excitement. I have a hula hoop that I keep in my office, and so I often have them stand, and I put the hula hoop on the floor, and then I say, I want you to imagine that this is a ring of power. And whenever you are associated and connected to the particular emotion that you want, and you're feeling it at the very top, then I want you to step into that particular hula hoop. And when you're beginning to notice that that emotion is waning and it's going down, then I want you to step out and step back. And so, once they're in the, so I'll say, can you remember a very specific time when you felt excitement? And as you remember that time, and you start feeling it in your body, then I want you to step into the hoop. I step into the hoop and I say, feel what you felt, see what you saw, hear what you heard. And a lot of times I'm going to add this piece, is that a lot of times I will create an additional kinesthetic or sensory anchor at the same time. So now I am like stacking anchors for them. So depending on whatever their sport is or whatever it is that they are doing, sometimes I'll have them like put their hand on their heart to kind of have that, the heaviness and that state, anchoring that particular state. Sometimes I'll have them like touch their face, run their hand through their hair, pull their ear, do funky things with their hands. It doesn't actually matter. It's just something that they can connect to and resonate to. And then when they are coming down, then they step back down. And then you anchor each particular state individually, and you go each one by one, and then you reinforce them all together. I hope this makes sense. And so the idea then is that then they, and then I say, now I want you to imagine that this particular ring then shrinks and you're putting it on your finger and you carry it with you. And so anytime that you need it, then you can just kind of pull it out and then visualize it on the ground and step into it, and then know that you can recall it both by the sensory anchor or by just stepping into the ring. So, and then of course I tell them that they need to go and practice it on and on. Now, the second intervention that I want to share with you is an intervention that is basically it's a post-performance evaluation intervention. Why? Partly because how we evaluate how we do, so what we attribute our successes or failures to, contribute to the creation of a particular story. And the stories that we create then generate feelings. And then these feelings are the things that we end up walking away with and associating with that particular event. So this is based on attribution theory and positive psychology. So this probably is going to sound familiar to many of you. But so I'm going to give you a review. So people that have a pessimistic explanatory style, so people that attribute things that are coming from a pessimistic explanatory style, when a negative event happens, they attribute it to something personal. I'm not good at this. To something permanent. I'm never going to be good at it. And something pervasive. This is bad and everything else is bad. So if you can imagine that you had, a not so great particular event, you had a negative, what we consider a negative or a failed event, and then their attribution is like, I'm not good enough, I'm never going to be good enough, and everything else is just as bad, then their expectations, as you can imagine, are, it's never going to improve. I'm just going to continue to suck at this, which means that their motivation is going to decrease, their perseverance is going to decrease, and then they're going to create what we call that self-fulfilling prophecy of a negative outcome and a negative story. Now, somebody that has an optimistic explanatory style, and again, this is part of what we are trying to train them to switch their mindset, switch their perspective. And when a negative event happens, so again, it's still that same crappy negative event, we are going to teach them, or they are attributing it to something situational, right? It just happened in this particular situation. It is just temporary, and it was just specific to this one thing. So if you can imagine that you are now creating a story that is saying, yeah, this went poorly, and it was just a one-time thing. There was this one thing that I missed or was missed, and it was just temporary. So the expectations for that particular athlete are going to be like, yeah, I can totally knock it out of the park next time. I just need to make a few adjustments. Their motivation for continue to work and to try and to go back to attempt it again, maybe speakers, this happens a lot with my speakers, it's going to increase. Their perseverance and their ability to be able to bounce back when things aren't going well is going to increase. And then of course, they're going to contribute to creating a positive outcome. So, and of course, then this is reversed for positive events, right? So people that have a pessimistic explanatory style will explain positive events in this way, which is part of the reason why when good things happen, they're kind of just thrown away, and then they just keep holding on to all those negative things, and vice versa. So really what we want to do is to help them craft an empowering story for them, right? We want to teach them to see negative events as situational, temporary, and specific. And you really want to help them provide that perspective, because a lot of times when they're really stuck in it, they cannot see other stories. And then seeing that as a stepping stone for success. And then seeing positive events as personal, like, you know, you put in a lot of effort or you are highly skilled, seeing it as pervasive. This is going to extend to all the things that you do and permanent. And once you achieve this particular level of success, it's going to stay, and then you're just going to continue to build on it. So the idea, again, is to help them anchor positive feelings, to help them own their strengths, their effort and power in success, so that regardless of whether the event was negative or positive or failure or success, that they can walk away feeling empowered and highly motivated to keep trying and doing more stuff. So for me, how I will evaluate effectiveness is that I will ask participants in follow-up visits to complete a quick self-report assessment. I also will ask them, did they connect with the intervention? Did they actually practice it? How did they find it effective, or how did they use it? Did they use it in more than one context? A lot of times I'll teach athletes a particular intervention, and I was working with a runner and we did a particular intervention before her race. And then when I met with her again, she said, yeah, it was really awesome for my race. And I did the same thing when I was going into my test at school, because I was feeling kind of nervous. So I did the same thing. And then that worked really well there too. So are they able to then transfer those skills to other settings, which is really awesome. And then I usually will be asking, like, what are their target goals, their target behaviors, their target responses? Are they achieving those? I will ask how using that particular intervention has supported their efforts, or do we need to do something different? Do we need to change it? And then what else do they need to add? And then I just want to leave you with, and I think that this is very similar to what Veronique said, that just recognizing that it all starts with you as the performance enhancement coach, the mental trainer, the sports psychologist, that we most model, challenge, and teach, and that we are modeling leadership to everyone that we're working with, so that we must embody those traits and skills that we teach, that we most continually challenge ourselves and recognize that we are mirrors and reflectors of what we teach to those that we are working with. And I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes by Robin Sharma, which is that leadership is what you do when no one's watching. And I love that, because it's the idea that you're not doing it because other people are expecting you, but because, you really believe in it and you are doing it even when nobody else is watching. So I'd love if you guys have any questions, you want to converse with me or anything like that. I have put both of my websites, so both of them have contact forms, so you can reach me super easily that way. And then I'm just going to transition and open it up for you to do questions and answers, and just for us to just interact a little bit more. And if I need to give this back in some other way, Bree, feel free to let me know.
All right. Thanks, y'all, so much. That was amazing. So I know we're a little bit over time, so we definitely want to respect people's time, but I think we're going to take just a couple minutes. I'll ask one question that came through that I think is an amazing follow-up to what you were speaking about, Dr. Elena, about just like being in those uncomfortable spaces and kind of walking the walk and living what you preach. So this question comes from Chelsea, and it's, how has your personal approach to the work or consulting philosophy changed as you have been doing this work?
I love that. I feel like I have gotten from being more impersonal to being more personal. Like I started with lots of theory and lots of out there, to actually like living my life, and then using not just theory but my life as example, like being more real and being willing to kind of share some of my struggles and my foibles and those kinds of things, because then it created a deeper connection. So in some ways I think that it's made me, being in this profession, I think has made me be a better person, because whenever I think about like, oh my gosh, how would my students or my clients think about how I'm responding, then it always makes me think about like, how am I going to show up, how am I going to respond. But in the same way, it goes back whenever I'm speaking with them, you know. And I'm super curious about how that might have worked for Veronique or Jessie as well.
Mm-hmm. Veronique, I think you're still on mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, for me, I think working with circus artists and the professor mainly increase my spontaneity. You know, sometimes we tend to be big thinker, especially when you do a lot of research, and I don't know, they are so much free and spontaneous in the way they act that I think, yeah, that work and seeing them just go through all those artistic workshop makes me, yeah, it kind of taught me this at the same time. So it was yeah, I would say that's my answer.
Thank you. Jessie, you want
Do you want me to give? Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's like what you're saying, Elena, like practice what you preach, I think is crucial. And, you know, being able to take what you know about the literature and the theory and make it personal. But like, if I'm not practicing what I preach myself, then our athletes aren't going to buy what I'm selling worth a nickel. So it's just like also being authentic. We talk a lot about like being true to yourself, and in this environment, it's really tough. You know, a lot of alpha males, a lot of competition, always looking over your shoulder, the threat of getting released or cut. So it's a big challenge, and I acknowledge it. I try my best to acknowledge all the inherent challenges of this environment for our players, and how unfair it could be if they allow it to be, and then challenge them to right the ship mentally.
I just want to share something else too, that I just thought about, is because I continue to perform in both aerial dance and dance, I feel like I'm constantly challenged. You know, every time that you're learning a new skill, and Veronique probably can attest to this, like you land on the floor, you're on the floor a lot more than you're up in the air. And so I feel like it keeps me humble. It keeps me in this place of recognizing that we're always going for that next thing, you know, and there's always an edge. And so being able to kind of stay in that place, I think just gives me this very unique perspective of really being able to relate to what they're going through, and you know, whether it's speaking or, you know, performing or competing.
Yeah. There are so many parallel processes that go along with being a professional working with clients. So I really appreciate you all sharing those experiences. We have a couple more questions, but I'll send them out to you all and email them and let you know who sent them, and hopefully we can get their email and you can converse in that way. But I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. This was our first webinar that offered continuing education credits. So thank you for everyone who signed up and received those CE credits, because those are important. And a special thank you to Dr. Elena, Dr. Veronique, and Dr. Jessie. Y'all were amazing and contributed a lot to this webinar, so thank you. So this webinar, once again, was recorded and will be available for viewing, so we will be sending out information about that later on. And then I'll just like to make not a lot, but some announcements about Division 47 and some things that we have coming up. The most important is that the call for collaborative programming has gone out, and so if you look like you want to join a division and present at APA, that deadline is October 11th, so we definitely encourage you to do that. And then the deadline for submitting abstracts for division programming is December 2nd, so that's coming up. And those are announcements that Division 47 have. We thank you all again for attending, and thank you all for presenting. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.